Hi, last night I came across Gavin's video that was called The Library of My Life. Turns out Tiana Tea has created this kind of fantastic video idea for booktubers. So I'll leave a link to both their videos down below so you can go and check out their brilliant libraries. But effectively it is books throughout your life that have had an influence on you. A bit like when celebrities and people say, oh, these songs really influenced me. Well, these are the books that influenced me. The idea is that you pick books that have had some sort of influence or have some sort of story about a particular point in your life. I'm going to start with a book that I really can't find in the house, and that's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass and What She Found There by Lewis Carroll. First book I remember reading from my primary school. It was up on the top shelf and I had to climb up on the bookcase to stand on it to get it. It was a big hardback book, beautiful illustrations. I distinctly remember reading that book quite vividly, and because of that I haven't reread it since because I don't want to lose the magic of those first memories. But that is the first book that I actually remember going to my school library and being excited about and reading it. So that would be my first book on my list. Then it gets a little complicated. It's going to get a little messy after this. The Bunty Annuals. This is from '82. Actually, I've got this one specifically because it's the first one I remember reading. For those of you that know me, I am partially sighted. I actually can't see out of my right eye, which meant I had to go to hospital at least twice a year to see if there was anything they could do about it. Spoiler alert, they can't. And just make sure that the health of my eye was okay. And we went to Shrewsbury Hospital, which invariably meant waiting there all day because there was one clinic a month that came there. We all waited, nothing ran on time. And in this big open area, I mean, it was a massive waiting room because it was, you know, sort of the heart of several departments. There was this sort of play area for the kids with lots of toys and that. And there was a bookcase, and on the bookcase were Bunty Annuals. And this is one I distinctly remember picking up at the time. So while I was waiting for my eye appointment, I would sit there and read the Bunty Annuals back to front. I have to say, I love the Four Marys in here. That's how bad my copy is. The pages are actually falling out. But yeah, the Four Marys are on this side. They all go to a boarding school together. They're all called Mary, and their stories were always in red. And it was a mystery story. You had comedy bits in here. Oh my god, I've got a bookmark in here. There's challenges in here. 3 imps, you know. But it was just full of stories. Oh yes, wow. I haven't read this one for a while. Mojo, the Milky Way Dog. This kept me sane. Oh, I'm missing the first page. I haven't got the first page. It was Marion. I'm missing the first pages of it. Oh, that's annoying. God, this is actually my copy. It's got my name in it. How terrible is that? But yeah, so I would sit and read these annuals. So, you know, that's part of my life. But this is a battered, look, I've got another battered and bruised copy here. This is Something to Do from Puffin. And it's, oh God, it's, look at this. This book is falling apart so badly. But it's effectively a collection of things to do throughout the year, sorted by month. So you get a little poem about the month. You get a highlight, you know, key dates of June, it's Midsummer's Day. You get the bird and the flower and a pet for the month. And then how to look after the pet as well. And then you get some cooking, you get some things you can do outside, things to do indoors. And it's great fun. I mean, I love it. But yeah, my copy is falling apart. But I picked this up. We'd had a Blue Peter bring and buy sale. Do you remember them? And in our classroom, we had an area where all the stuff that was left over from it went. And I'd helped out all day. And I'd had my eye on this book. And I said, if it's still there at the end of the day, you know, I'm going to pick it up. And it was. So I went up to my teacher and said, look, I've got 20p. A lot of money back then. That was a bar of chocolate, 20p. Can I have a book? And I was told, go and help yourself. And I picked this up. And I love it. It's still, you know, I still go to it. It's got so many weird and wonderful things in. And it's just well and truly falling apart. This copy of the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. Now this is the complete collection with the original illustrations in full colour. So I go to the famous one. Oh, can you see that? Yes, you can. So yeah, I had some Christmas money. We went into Waterstones in Shrewsbury, close to where I grew up, and they had all their books out, and I was wondering what to get. I only had enough money for one book, really. And I got this one because it was on offer. I think it was like £5 off it. And so I got The Complete Chronicles of Narnia. It's the first book I remember actually buying for myself, which is really nice. And it's a beautiful edition. It's just so heavy. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. My dad is a massive Hitchhiker's fan, and he would throw quotes at me from the radio series that he'd grown up listening to all the time. And so we'd go to my local library every week. That was our treat on a Thursday after school. And I found was it the quartet? I think it was the quartet at that point. So the first 4 books in the series, I think they had all of them then. And they were all in this format with the 4 different pictures on it. So I picked it up and I read it. So I was able to quote things back to my dad at that point, and we'd have loads of conversations about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Douglas Adams. And you know, from that I learnt that Douglas had been writing for Doctor Who, discovered he'd written some really absolute bonkers stories in it that I really love, that he'd done Dirk Gently, that I went on to read a bit later. So yeah, I owe a lot to my dad introducing me to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And in a similar vein, because my dad quite liked Doctor Who growing up, I think he was a Troughton Pertwee chap, my library also held copies of the novelisations, the Target books, most of them written by Terrance Dicks. And this is one of my favourite ones, really atmospheric and all that. I hadn't seen many at the time that I was reading these, but this one, this actual copy, would just about fit in my big coat pocket. I had a full length woolen coat, and my granny knitted me a big old scarf, and this would fit in the pocket, and I would carry this around with me and read it at college, which, you know, I found myself a nice floppy hat as well, so yeah, I had a bit of a reputation for being slightly odd. But yeah, this is the copy because it's all rubbed off at the corner where I just had to squeeze it into the pocket a little bit more. But I really love Horror Fang Rock. The book's actually quite a good novelisation. It really ramps up the horror aspect of the episode, and the episodes themselves are actually not pretty bad. Another book that I don't actually have, and that's Sweet Valley High, and I'm going to single out Dangerous Love, which I think is about book 6 maybe. It's a yellow cover with a motorbike, and it's got one of the twins, I can't remember the twins' name now, and a young lad on the front. And when I went to secondary school, they had a massive library. One half was fiction and one half was non-fiction. And in the fiction, you had a stack of bookcase, floor to ceiling, that was full of Sweet Valley High books. Now, I'd never heard of this thing before, and the rule was you could only borrow one book from Sweet Valley High. You had to have, you know, you were allowed to borrow 2 books, but only one you could borrow at a time of Sweet Valley. They had that kind of limit on them. And I ploughed through these. I literally read these books overnight. And it was certainly my first introduction to American high schools, teenage drama, romance, and all that kind of stuff. You know, they were like my opening into what would eventually become YA romance fiction. But yeah, Dangerous Love I think was the first one I actually read, because they didn't have book 1 in at the time. But that's the one I distinctly remember. Probably for very wrong reasons. I have never reread them. I don't think I want to reread them because I have a horrible feeling they're really, really cheesy now. But that would be an experience. But yeah, and ironically, I've never seen them anywhere else. It was the only time I ever saw these books while I was at secondary school. Next up is Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. Channel 4 started showing the Canadian version of Anne of Green Gables with Megan Follows. And I sat and watched it with my mum. I'm trying to think how old I was. I can't have been much into my teens. I must have been like early to mid 90s. I'd have to check the dates. But I remember watching that together. And she said, well, they're based on the books. So I found these. I actually found these again. I think this is in my local library with these tie-in covers. They'd just been published. And I read these. I loved Anne so much. I identified with her. You know, she was like, yeah, I get that. I get what it feels to be out of place. you know, to have this big imagination that you can't do anything with. I really felt for Anne. I really identified with her, and certainly reading the Anne books and watching Anne grow up and be accepted and become happy in her life meant a huge lot to me, who actually thought that would never happen. So I'm now, ooh, look at that, happy 16th birthday, Grandad and Gran. Mossflower by Brian Jacks. This is book 2 in the Red Wolf series of books, which I do have all of them. There was a young lad called Ben in my, I remember distinctly, geography class. It was the room at the back of school, and he was reading this book, and he, you know, would sit there in lesson and read it, and I was sort of like, what are you doing? You know, I mean, I was a teacher's pet. I could have read in lesson, but I didn't. I kind of wish I did now for a lot of them. Anyway, he was reading in lessons, and then one day I bumped into him in the library and actually reading it. And I said, well, what are you reading? And he said, I'm reading Mossflower. It's really, really good. And I thought, you know, this is a boy reading, and, you know, for me back then, boys didn't read. It wasn't a thing boys did. So to actually see a chap that I knew reading a book with animals in, and I thought, well, this book's got to be good. And I'm trying to think, did my library have it? I think did my library have it in, or he lent me his copy? I can't remember. But I read Mossflower and absolutely loved it. I fell in love with it, and I started picking them up. Now, I was introduced to them when they started republishing them with the image like cover rather than the illustrated covers that I've got. So there was this brilliant secondhand bookshop down the road from my grandparents in Hitchin that had loads of these books in the original illustrated form. I just said to my grandparents, can you buy me these books? You know, here's the list. Go and just, I don't mind them secondhand. I want them with the illustrated covers. You know, don't go and get them all from Smith's because they're reprinting them. And my grandma's like, you sure you want secondhand books? Like, yeah, totally. So most of my books are secondhand and from my grandparents, because she just kept picking them up for me every time they went into town, which was lovely. But yeah, had it not been for Ben, I would never have discovered Redwall, and probably not discovered a love for fantasy, because I hadn't read much fantasy at that point. During my college years, so doing my A-levels, I got a job in, first up, a chip shop. Oh my gosh. Yeah, hands down, anybody who works in a chip shop, well done. Yeah, that was fun. And then I got a job in a bakery. But I distinctly remember my first wages actually going into my local bookshop, which was just across the road from the college, and asking for a book. And she didn't have it on the shelf. Actually, lovely lady, lovely old lady in there. And so she got the ordering catalogue out. And, you know, how many remember the yellow pages when it was like this thick? That's how big this catalogue was that came out. And she goes, well, what do you want? And I said, I want a Doctor Who book, having just got into Doctor Who. So she'd found the relevant page. And I'm not kidding, it was like a whole double column page of Doctor Who titles at this point. And, you know, some of those were the Target novelisations, but a lot of them were the new Virgin paperbacks that have been published over the last few years. And so I went down and I go, can I have this one? And I pointed to the title. I found the ISBN number in this massive, it was about a third of the way down in the second column, and it was The Pit by Neil Penswick. I think this is about the 7th, 8th book in the original run of the New Adventures, and it's got the 7th Doctor in here. And Benny's just been introduced. I had no idea who Benny was or anything like that. But this is, I distinctly remember the whole process of ordering this book. The fact I was allowed to look through this ordering catalogue of all these books. And that's what I kept doing. Because I did because I worked every morning for a couple of hours, I actually ended up with quite a decent pay at the end of the week. And I had good wages. I was quite fortunate with my bakery job. And so every other week I would go in, get the catalogue out, and I would order another book from this series. And I was literally just picking books by the title because I had no idea what the stories were about or anything. I literally just picked by title. And then I just, you know, I kept looking around and started getting past Doctor books. But that whole experience of ordering my first book through the catalogue, I mean, you don't do that anymore. It's all online. But to have a catalogue in front of you with all these book titles that you could order. Amazing. I think this is the final book while I was at school. Again, in my school library, there were 2 shelves just to the left of the window in the far corner that had the Agatha Christie books on, and they were all the matching paperbacks that had been released. And the first one I borrowed was actually Sparkling Cyanide. This is my magazine tie-in copy, and that was the first Agatha Christie book I read, and I devoured that shelf pretty quickly as well. That school library had such a good selection of books that I actually haven't come across again since. I don't think I've ever seen a school library so good as the one I grew up with. I was so lucky. But yeah, so Sparkling Cyanide. I don't know why I picked it. I really don't, because you know, it's not, is it even a Hercule Poirot? I don't even think it's a Hercule Poirot or a Miss Marple. It's so long since I've read it. No, it's not. Must have been something about the cover. So I picked that up. I remember reading Sparkling Cyanide, the ABC Murders, which had the building blocks on with the letters, and the Big Four. That was a yellow cover. I can't quite remember what was on it. Was it the dice? But they were like the first 3 Agatha Christie's I read, and I loved them so much. So yeah. Right, the next book that I'm putting on my Library of My Life is a book I absolutely despised. I did not enjoy this book when I read it. I still don't think much of this book series, and thankfully I'm no longer in the minority, so thank you very much for finally catching up and agreeing with me. And that is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by she who shall not be mentioned. I read this at university. I was doing a primary education course, and this book kind of came out and was making huge waves at this point. I think Potter, the first one came out in 97. I'd started university in 99, and at this point the films were hitting the cinemas and people were actually starting to rave about this series. And it's like, well, I'm going into primary school teaching, perhaps I ought to read this bloody book that everybody's on about. It took me 6 months. 6 months to read this thing. It was a slog. It was unoriginal. I hated the writing style. I didn't like the main characters. I absolutely despised it. And the fact I was kind of forcing myself to read it did not really help at all. That's Harry Potter. I'm trying to think. Was it my first wedding anniversary? I think it was my first wedding anniversary. My mother-in-law paid for me and my husband to go and see Wicked in the West End. And he's not a musical person. He actually actively turns off when there are musical numbers in Disney films. So to find him singing along to Moana is quite reassuring. But yeah, he actually quite enjoyed Wicked. And so we came out and I had to buy the Grimoire, which is basically tying into the whole theatre production. I mean, it's beautiful. Inside there are, you know, it is a gorgeous book. But yeah, so I had to buy this because it was just fantastic. And it goes through, it's got the whole script in here as well for the stage play. So it's really nice. And little bonusy things in here. Oh, some of the props and everything. I mean, behind the scenes of how the clock dragon works and everything, which is lovely. So I picked that up, and then I also obviously picked up the tie-in cover for the book by Gregory Maguire, which I have yet to read. I've had this book nearly 15 years and I still haven't read it yet. I'm really, really bad. But these are both tied into that night of watching probably one of my favourite theatre productions I've ever seen in my life. Bearing in mind at that point I'd seen about 4. These are definitely part of my life. Yeah, a little bit before that, my husband-to-be read me Mort by Terry Pratchett. I have told this story before, but I came down actually really ill one day at work and was pretty much laid out on the sofa with God knows what. I have no idea. I've never felt quite so ill in my life. It was certainly my first sick day, and I wish I'd taken a few more off, to be honest. But yeah, he read me this cover to cover over the course of the day, which was really sweet of him because he should have been doing his coursework at university and he wasn't. And it was my introduction to Discworld and Terry Pratchett. It was lovely. So yeah, we get to a certain point and be, no, I've got to go to the loo and go throw up. You just stop and go and help me throw up, which is lovely. So yeah, Mort. Then there's Cross Stitch by Tiana Tea. Most people know this as Outlander now. This story I've told before, but I was browsing on the internet and saw these pictures for this production of a thing called Outlander that was coming to Amazon Prime. And I was absolutely blown away by the costume design, and I was looking at in detail all these photographs and reading up about it and discovered that it was actually based on a book. So I went and got the book. I managed to find this copy, the original UK publication title, which is really nice because you can't get this anymore. It doesn't exist as cross stitch. And I read it so quickly, considering how big this book is. I read it really, really quickly. And I loved it. And I told this story in my response to the Times 100 fantasy list. But effectively, at that point, I was feeling my marriage was sort of stagnating and wasn't going anywhere. And, you know, I think we'd come out of the honeymoon period for me. And this book kind of saved our marriage, I think, because it reminded me that marriage and love changes over time. And that it's something you work at. You know, you don't stop loving someone, but the way you love them can change over the time. And yeah, I think this book, I certainly think I needed it at that point in my life. But yeah, I went on and read the entire series, so we're currently waiting for the last book at the moment. And then finally, Just One Damn Thing After Another by Jodie Taylor. I can't actually remember when I discovered this, but it's one of those book series where I got the first 3. That was it. I got the first 3 in Waterstones. They were on offer. I think it was 3 for 2. And I went to one Waterstones in Milton Keynes, because there's 2 in the shopping centre in Milton Keynes. Found 2 of them and had to go and get the other one from the other shop. I remember that really distinctly. And I read these books so fast. I devoured them. They were so enjoyable and bubbly and bright. And actually, it's the first thing I'd read in a long time that reminded me of that flippant humour that Douglas Adams had. And I really liked the mix of time travel, because obviously that ticked my Doctor Who box. You know, I had a female lead, which was really cool. I had the humour, the very, very British humour, and the slight twist on, you know, the timeline and all that. But I really remember seeing these all lined up on the shelves at the end of the bookcases, and they would just looked beautiful in their matching covers. I think there was like 7 out at the time that had been published that way, and yeah, I just brought them all. It's really cool. There we are. And the last one I want to mention is actually a graphic novel, and that's The World Shapers. This is by John Ridgway and Grant Morrison and Jamie Deland. It's the collected comic strips from the Doctor Who Monthly magazine, as it was back then in the 80s, which I'd missed out because obviously I was far too young at that point. And this, I think, was the first time that I was introduced to a comic that just went absolutely bonkers and was really deep and complex and had big ideas. And, you know, a lot of comics growing up were like in the Bunty annuals, you know, quite straightforward, simple stories. And this is the one where I sat there and realised, wow, you know, comics can actually be something quite mind-blowingly amazing. And I think after I'd read this, I jumped into Fables and Constantine, and I sort of really went into reading comics in a big way. There you go. So that is my library of my life. The one thing I will look back on and now say is it's extremely Western and white. I'm afraid that's what I grew up with. Obviously, my bookcases are becoming more and more diverse every single time I go book shopping, which is fantastic. But they're the books, certainly, from the first 30 years of my life that have had a key influence on me for whatever reason. Not all of them good. I feel like doing a music one as well, because I'm sure there's key musical numbers that have really had an influence on me as well, but I'd have to think about that a bit more. Anyway, if you fancy doing that, let me know. Drop me a link down below. It'd be great to see your library. And there we go. As I say, go and check out Gavin and Tina's videos as well. Of course, full credit goes to Tina, because this is her original idea and nobody else's. So please, if you do a video of this or mention it in your blog, do credit her. As always, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram and Goodreads. I'm also on Storygraph, which I'm really going to recommend to you. It's so cool, so much fun. I'm trying to adjust my stats on it a little bit. There are also links to booktubers because the YouTube algorithm is, sorry, absolutely pathetically rubbish. So I want you to go and check out these booktubers and give them some love, subscribe, like, all that kind of stuff. And also, you know, if you like what you see here, if you can cope with my ramblings, please subscribe, like, hit the notification bell, whatever, and no pressure, you can do what you fancy. And I would just like to say a big thank you to all my new subscribers out there. I have noticed there's a few of you been sneaking in lately, so hi, thank you. It's really kind of you. As always, thank you very much for watching. Happy reading and be well.